Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishna Nazir, Parak Tes, Chapter 9. We're in the middle of Mishnah Daled, Mishnah 4. So before we continue in the Mishnah, we need a introduction. The next Mishnah, the next part of the Mishnah, teaches a lot about a Zav. A Zav is a man who experiences a certain kind of discharge from his male member. This and the discharge is somewhat different in color and consistency than semen. It's not the same thing as that. Someone who experiences this type of discharge twice over the course of 1 or 2 days becomes a zav and is tummy for 7 days. To become tar, he must have no discharge for 7 days and then immerse himself in a natural spring. Not a mikveh. Mikveh, in technical terms, really means something that the water is gathered into. And a zav, that's not enough for him to purify himself. He has to go to a natural spring. Now, if he experiences this type of discharge 3 times, and 3 times here means 3 times over 3 consecutive days, or 3 discharges over a course of 1 or 2 days, if this is what he has in a third experience, then he must also bring a carbon, a sacrifice for his fully tar, which means he has to, again, have 7 clean days, no discharge, and on day that goes to the mikveh, and on day 8, he has to bring a set of carbonas before he can be fully tar, fully pure, such as to partake from sanctified food, like a carbon. Now, if he has this discharge only once, he is not considered a zav. He doesn't have all the ramifications of a zav. A person is a zav, there are certain ramifications of his impurity, such as if he, let's say, lies down on something, and even though he's putting his pressure, putting his weight on it, even if he's not directly touching it, a zav would make that impure. But he has to be a zav for that. If he's not a zav, such as he only had 1 emission, then he's like a man who had a seminal emission, and he is impure for 1 day. So if you have 1 emission of ziva, you're impure for a day. If you have 2 over 1 or 2 days, you have to be clean for 7 days before you can become pure again. If you have 3 discharges, again over 1 or 2 days or in 3 consecutive days, then you have to add to that to become pure a set of sacrifices that have to be brought after the 7 clean days. Now, the point of our mission is going to be the following. When a man has his second discharge, he becomes a zav only if this discharge is a result of a disease affecting his genital organs. Ziva, being a zav, is really a result of a certain type of a disease. Okay? But if the discharge was not the result of this illness, but was caused by some other factor, because there are other factors that can cause it to happen, he does not become a zav. This is the whole point of the next Mishnah, of that Mishnah we're about to learn. That when it comes to becoming impure, we're talking about becoming a zav after the second time, then if this emission came about due to other things, or we can apply it to other things, then we say he is not pure. He does not become impure like a zav. It's not called he had two emissions. He had 1 emission and the second one is another type of like that of that first emission that doesn't make him into a zav. He's going to be impure, but it's not going to make him into a zav with all its ramifications. So really, what happens is like this: the first discharge doesn't make a difference what it came from. The second one, there'll be a difference. If we say it comes from the disease that's causing this, fine. Then that's fine. Then it's a second emission, he becomes a zav. But if there are other things that we can say it came because of that, by the second one, there are other things, and that's going to be the next list in the Mishnah, then he does not become a zav. So, B'Shiva, let's read. B'Shiva Durachem Beit Knes HaZav. There are 7 ways in which we check a zav to see if a second discharge is a result of the disease that causes this, or because of some other factor. And we do this before he becomes established as a Zav. Meaning before we decide that he is a Zav. And again, it carries, you have to have 7 clean days before we become pure. There are certain things that a Zav makes Tameh that are specific to a Zav. Like I mentioned before, these only happen after the second emission. If that second emission came because of some other factor, then we say he's not a Zav. So what are these factors? Here we go. B'machol, we look into his food. If he ate something that can cause him to have a discharge, such as, and this is what the Bartanura brings down, fatty meat, milk, cheese, or eggs. Meaning, did you eat this before you had the emission? Okay. Or of a Mishna, we look into his drink. If he drank old wine or drank too much wine, that can cause him to experience this kind of discharge. But that would be these things causing the discharge, not the disease. B'masa, did he carry a heavy load, which might have made him weak, and the weakness causes a discharge. B'kfitza, we look into whether he was jumping. Jumping can cause the discharge. Ubechayli, we look into if he had any other kind of sickness that affected his whole body, and that again didn't affect just his genital area, but rather it affected his whole body, which again I understand means it weakens him, and therefore can cause a discharge. Uvamara, we look into whether he looked at a woman. That's what caused him this kind of discharge, not a seminal discharge. This kind of discharge. Ubehirer, or we looked into whether he'd been thinking about a woman. Now, they bring down here from the Bartanura, seeing a woman even without thinking about her beforehand can cause a discharge, as can think about a woman even without seeing her. But again, this is this type of discharge. Okay? So therefore, that's the list. Those are the 7 things. If any of these happen before a second discharge, he does not become a Zav. Because we assume that the discharge was caused by one of these things and not by the condition that makes a person into a Zav. However, Misha Niskak Leziva, but once he became a Zav, that means he had 2 emissions that establish him as a Zav. And now the question is, the third emission, which we said now means that before it can become Torah, he has to bring a set of karbanos, a set of sacrifices, Ein Beit K'naisai. We don't check him for it. It doesn't make a difference if these other things preceded the emission. Because by the third one, he's going to become a Zav no matter what. Or, so there, anybody can I say, we don't check him. Oinsai usfeika b'shechazaroi temeyin. Oinsai means the any kind of accidental discharge, meaning any one of these 7 things mentioned before, that's not a discharge from the disease, but some other thing that affected it. Usfeika b'shechazaroi. This means, or where there is a question whether this emission of Ziva is resulted from his emission of semen. Now, what that means is like this. If someone, listen to this is important to know. If someone has a second discharge after having an emission of semen, he first had an emission of semen and then he had this discharge. There are 2 different types of discharges, as we said before. Okay, this was the second time. Nonetheless, he does not become a Zav. This is because we assume that the emission of semen caused the discharge. This is included in the category of illness, since the emission of semen causes a weakness in the person. And that weakness can now bring on this other type of discharge that is the same type of discharge of a Zav, but it won't make him a Zav. If it was preceded by a discharge of semen, then a discharge of Ziva will not make him into a Zav. Now, the Mishnah teaches that this exemption does not apply when his third discharge follows an emission of semen. Even if the emission of semen did cause a discharge, he still must bring an offering. That's between the second and the third. The second works. The second is, as the Mishnah says, it's a question of becoming a Zav. Becoming a Zav, then we say if semen preceded it or these other things in the list preceded it, doesn't become a Zav. But once he is a Zav, and now the question is, does he become a Zav that has to bring a set of karbanos, a set of sacrifices before he becomes tahar? Then none of these things are going to make a difference. If he had that emission of the Ziva type emission, that will make him into a Zav who needs a set of karbanos before he can become fully tahar. Okay, we'll stop here and continue tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Does this involve Kohen come?